day 21 out of the 31 days of Halloween masks here on the channel. 21st episode, 21st day. So tonight we're going to get into two masks that are, the originals are so rare that through technology and original molds, they were brought back to life. One of them is from one of my favorite movies of all time, and another one is from the golden days of Don Post Studios. And I'm going to show you the two masks. One of them, there's like a couple versions of it, glow-in-the-dark version and a painted version. And there's little differences in the copies out there that are floating around the internet. I'm going to show you right now what I'm talking about here. Okay, the two masks we're talking about today. On the right, you've got the Don Post Ghoul, and on the left, this is a new copy of a very rare mask known as the House of Horrors Dracula. There was a line that predated the Universal Horrors line that came out around '66, and it was the House of Horrors. And there were 6 different masks that came out in the House of Horrors line, and that Dracula was one of them. Really, really great designed by Don Post. It's a pretty famous mask in the hobby. There's only one known original that exists amongst all the collectors known out there, and I'll get into more about that and how we have a new copy of it sitting here today. But first, we're going to start talking about this Ghoul mask here. I'm going to explain to you how there's modern castings of both of these masks today, and I'm going to talk about some movie history regarding this one on the right. A lot of you may recognize it already. And let's start the episode. Here we go. So in the later 70s, Don Post came out with this ghoul, this creepy ghoul dude here. And the masks were vinyl. They originated from a metal mold for rotocasting. And most of the copies out there looked a little different than this. They did not have these sharp teeth that are seen on these two here. I'll show you a picture of the more standard ghoul that everyone in the hobby has probably owned at one time or another. It was fairly easy all these years to find copies of the standard ghoul in flesh color, in vinyl. However, it was insanely rare to ever see the glow-in-the-dark version that came out around 78 or 79. I think it was in the 78 lineup. So originally in 1977, the Ghoul debuted in the catalog in a flesh-colored version, and he looked different than this copy. He did not have these sharp teeth, okay? There was no glow-in-the-dark version yet, and in 78, they debuted the glow-in-the-dark version, and that particular one, the glow-in-the-dark one, became so rare that it took years for collectors to finally see one surface. I'm talking like in the last 10 years, we finally saw one surface. And then another one ended up popping up, and they started selling for crazy money. Maybe $1,500 or $2,000, because we've never seen the glow version of that mask until recently. Since then, others have come out of the woodwork, and there's probably at least half a dozen of these guys out there, to my knowledge. Having those sharp teeth like that made them even more rare. Most ghouls you'd ever see out there in people's hands were the standard version vinyl ghoul. In fact, I think the first glow ghoul that popped up could have been the regular style without those sharp teeth. So, regarding this exact sculpt with this first version sharp teeth. So in 1979, the amazing Salem's Lot came out, and this particular sculpt, this ghoul, is seen in that film. When Mark's in his room, we know he's a monster kid. He shows off all his cool stuff. He holds up this mask, And he literally says it's a ghoul, ghoul as in school. And they always showed that elusive sculpt ghoul with the sharp teeth. And for years, there were none around. Plenty of regular standard ghouls with a different mouth and whatnot, and had one eyeball in it. But that Salem's Lot style ghoul was impossible to find. A mold did surface on it. Some pores came out years ago, and I owned one of them at the time, but it was painted up like the Salem's Lot ghoul. But it was a latex rubber casting, from what I remembered. And everybody wanted this style ghoul. With that look as seen in Salem's Lot, you know, collectors dubbed these the Salem's Lot ghoul because it's the exact sculpt that was seen in the film with those teeth. As time went by, a glow ghoul surfaced with the sharp teeth. I'm talking a vintage copy. These are modern pulls. Another vintage one pops up with the teeth, and we're like, oh my god, it's from that mold, that early mold with the sharp teeth. And I think that could have been the one that went for a lot of money on eBay at the time. But, you know, I think I owned 2 different glow ghouls myself, originals, and ended up selling them later on when this project came about. So, a collector by the name of Joel Grossman, a lot of you may know who he is. He's one of the more important Don Post collectors out there. He did a project where he was going to bring back this elusive Salem's Lot ghoul. He was going to bring it back through rotocasting the old way with the actual like vintage mixtures of vinyl. Like there were 55-gallon drums of the exact vinyl material that Post used in the 70s. I'm talking, he went all out to make sure these masks were going to be exactly the way they were made in the 70s, but better. And the orders were taken for only so many, you know, Salem's Lot style or the glow-in-the-dark version. There's actually like 5 different versions of these that Joel made, but these 2 are my favorite. It was cast, rotocast, in that vintage vinyl, through the metal mold, the old way, and he offered it. They're thick castings too. I mean, these are super thick. Look at this. This thing is incredible. Look at that. I mean, much nicer than the original pulls as far as the casting thickness. Of course, Rob and Kathy Tharp were called in on this project. Who better to do vintage Don Post style work than the masters themselves, the Tharps. These were meticulously painted just like they were on film and just like they were in 1978 when they were brand new glow-in-the-dark masks. So when this was coming out, I said, you know what, I'm gonna sell my original because I want a perfect copy out of that original studio mold. And it's got a fresh glow paint job, and it's got the little pink accents on it exactly the way that would have been when it was brand new in '78. So that's the story on these 2 very rare masks. I've had the originals of the glow ghoul, but I've still never seen a flesh colored Salem's Lot ghoul as an old 77 factory pull. It's always been the regular ghoul, which I've owned, but as soon as this popped up and was available, I jumped on it, and I had to have another Salem's Lot ghoul, but better than the first one I had. You know, this one is superior quality. In the movie, they painted like hair on top of his head. See that hairline? They weren't like that from Don Post. He was pretty much bald, so he had skin tone up there and not that brown cap on his head with paint. But this is done exactly the way you'll see it in Salem's Lot. Ghoul as in school, right there. So Joel went through a lot to get this project going, and it was executed perfectly. He really took the time to make sure these were done right. and with vintage vinyl, vintage liquid vinyl, no less. They smell like old Don Post vinyl masks. It's basically a vintage mask made, you know, in the past 5 years. Brand new, thicker than they would ever be from the factory. And even the paint is superior to what they would look like coming from an assembly line at Don Post Studios. That right there is 2 modern castings of a very rare 70s Don Post vinyl mask. Now, back to this guy. That's hands down one of the finest looking Dracula masks ever produced, right there. This was the very first mask that Pat Newman sculpted for Don Post Studios back in '63. There were 2 versions of this mask when it was new. One had sculpted hair, like you see there, and then there was a deluxe version. The deluxe version had fiber hair added to the top, like glued on hair. And I guess the deluxe version had the zipper, I believe, too. And the standard version with the hair did not. Okay. There are old photos from 1964, old promotional photos from Don Post Studios, where you'll see this mask being worn, and just the features. It's, I don't know what it is, but it just looks incredible. For years, only one copy was known, one original. Of those 6 Don Post masks, there was one known Dracula. They were one of the few Don Post masks ever designed with a zipper in the back. Probably the only one, I should say. So, for a long time, a man by the name of Joel Grossman owned the original, and he acquired it. I can't remember where he acquired it from. And Joel is the guy that was responsible for the last project I just showed you. And he gave it his all to bring this mask back as a brand new copy in a very limited run. And I'm going to tell you how he did it. So check this out. Through 3D technology, like he 3D scanned that original mask, and also had people like Norman Cabrera. If you know who Norman Cabrera is, he had Norman get on the project, who is a longtime special effects artist and veteran of the Hollywood movie scene. And he had Norman actually sculpt in that missing hair, because the copy that's known has the fiber hair. It's not like they're going to rip that off to see what that hair looked like underneath. He got Norman on the project to actually sculpt in all that Lugosi hair, trying to bring back that Pat Newman sculpture, and Norman did a killer job sculpting all that back there. And if it weren't for 3D technology, 3D scanning, you would not be able to bring a mask back like this without physically sculpting a whole new one by hand. Getting someone out there that's good enough to look at that original and sculpt another one exactly like it out of clay. So they were able to take that original and do a 3D scan of that thing, and you, through computer technology, literally make a new foam master. You know, it's amazing. It's similar technology to what I use in the things I build when I make custom jewelry. We do that. We do very similar type stuff out there. With molds and whatnot, but this is way cooler. I'm sick of looking at jewelry. This is amazing. So this was a lot of work, okay? It's not like they just scanned it and printed a copy. This was a lot to get to the point where they could finally make that master and produce a latex casting. I know the castings are slightly thicker than the originals, just so they would really last longer and not be paper thin. Tara Greer-Maloof was called in, and she was also a amazing painter at Don Post Studios. Tara hand painted each mask with a vintage style paint job using old style ink paints, just like they would have used back in the early 60s at Don Post Studios. And she also hand painted these using a restored vintage Pache airbrush. The same airbrush that would have been used to paint these in '63. So as you can see, when Joel goes and does a project, he really goes all the way, goes off the deep end with details, and that's what I love about things like this that he reproduces and brings back for people like me to actually have and own in my collection now. So this is part of a sold-out run of 13 that were made. They sold out fairly quickly. Just to run down again, the original was digitally scanned. Norman Cabrera hand sculpted that molded hair that is not seen on the existing copy that's out there that Joel owned at the time. He brought back that Pat Newman style, and he did it perfectly. He really gives you the feel that Pat Newman look from the eyebrows to the back of the head. You know, it's just all, it just flows nicely and is a very complete look with that sculpture. And Tara's paint job is what really made these masks come together. I mean, that is just incredible. I don't even remember what number I've got here. Let's take a look. Let me pull them up by his ear here. I've got number 9 out of the 13. So that's the 9th copy made. And I know a lot of you were asking about this mask. You've seen it in the background of some of my videos, but this is truly, as a collector, this is incredible that Joel and everyone involved was able to pull this off and bring this thing back to life. This is all possible through the 3D scanning and the amazing sculpting work of Norman Cabrera, that vintage style paint skill Tara Maloof laid on these copies, and with the help of Williams vintage airbrush, I now have an incredible brand new copy of that lost 60s mask. Well, not that lost. There's one copy out there, and now I've got a brand new copy of it. And I heard reports that the original sold for a crazy amount of money not too long ago. So that one now belongs in the hands of another collector. But there's 13 of us out there that have brand spanking new copies, and it makes you wish Joel would go through the trouble of reproducing a lot more masks out there through his digital scanning process, but in very limited numbers. I don't want to see hundreds of copies of every rare Don Post mask out there. It kind of kills it. So if you're going to do something like that, keep it really limited. Just my 2 cents. But now we brought some rare, nearly extinct masks back to life, and a handful of collectors can now own them, and had to share that with you today. So just a couple cool things we talked about today for number 21. Tomorrow will be the 22nd video, and I have no idea what we're going to talk about. Honestly, there's a lot still to go through, but I'll see you tomorrow.